E. It was a sound that woke me up, a soft creak, the kind you'd dismiss if you weren't already on edge. My heart skipped a beat as I sat up in bed, straining to listen. My uncle was sleeping down the hall, and the house was supposed to be empty. Yet something felt wrong, very wrong. My name is Elena, and until that night, I thought I had seen it all. I lived with my Uncle Richard. After my parents' sudden passing, he had always been my protector, my guiding light. But what happened that night changed everything I thought I knew about him. About us. The sound came again. This time louder. I slipped out of bed, my feet touching the cold hardwood floor. My first thought was to check on Richard, to make sure he was okay. But as I reached his door, I froze. It was ajar. Just enough for a sliver of moonlight to illuminate the room. I could see him, lying there, completely still. And then I saw the shadow. It moved quickly, almost imperceptibly across the far wall. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was in there with him. My mind raced, torn between fear and the desperate need to protect him. I pushed the door open slightly, trying to stay quiet. That's when I saw her. She was standing by his bed, her back to me. Her silhouette was striking, tall, graceful, but with an edge that felt predatory. She was holding something in her hand. Though I couldn't make out what it was, my instincts screamed at me to do something, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the sheer absurdity of the situation. "Richard," she whispered. Her voice low and dripping with something I couldn't quite place. Was it malice? Seduction? Both? I couldn't tell. All I knew was that I needed to act, and fast. Before I could move, she turned. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment I felt like she had seen right through me. There was no fear in her gaze, only a cold, calculated confidence. She smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips that sent a chill down my spine. "Elena," she said, as if she had been expecting me. "You're just in time." My heart pounded in my chest as she took a step toward me. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my attempt to sound brave. "That's not the question you should be asking," she replied. "The real question is, how much do you want to know?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I glanced at Richard, still motionless in his bed, and felt a surge of protectiveness. Whatever was happening, I needed to stop it. "Get away from him," I said, stepping into the room. She laughed, a soft, almost musical sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Elena, you have no idea what's really going on here, do you?" "Then tell me," I shot back. "What are you doing here?" She tilted her head, studying me like I was a puzzle she was trying to solve. "You're braver than I expected," she said. "But bravery without knowledge is just foolishness." Before I could respond, Richard stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he looked disoriented. Then his gaze landed on the woman, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. "No," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not her." "Yes, Richard," she said, her tone suddenly sharp. "Me." I turned to him, desperate for answers. "Uncle Richard, who is she?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. "Elena, leave. Now." "I'm not leaving you," I said firmly. "Not until I know what's going on." The woman sighed, as if bored by the whole exchange. "Fine," she said. "If you're so eager to know the truth, why don't we show her, Richard?" "Don't," he said, his voice pleading. "She doesn't need to know." "Oh, but she does," the woman countered, "because this is as much her story as it is yours." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. The woman walked over to me, her movements smooth and deliberate. "You think you know your family, Elena," she said, "but every family has its secrets. And yours? Yours are darker than most. Richard groaned, trying to sit up. Elena, don't listen to her. She's trying to manipulate you. Am I? She said, raising an eyebrow. Or am I finally giving her the truth you've been hiding all these years? I looked between them, my mind racing. What truth? I asked, my voice breaking. Richard looked at me, his expression tortured. Elena, I can't explain right now, but you have to trust me. Leave. And I'll tell you everything later. Liar, the woman said, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. You've been lying to her since the day she was born. I felt a lump form in my throat. Uncle Richard, what is she talking about? He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, the woman moved. Faster than I thought possible, she was beside him, her hand on his chest. Enough, she said. It's time for her to see. Richard's eyes widened in panic. No, don't. But it was too late. The room seemed to shift. The walls closing in as a wave of energy passed through me. Images flashed in my mind, memories that weren't mine, faces I didn't recognize, and a darkness that seemed to stretch on forever. When it was over, I was on my knees, gasping for breath. What was that? I whispered. The woman knelt beside me, her expression almost sympathetic. That, she said, is the truth. And it's only the beginning.